Hello, I never thought I would have to tell this story, because even now, I can't believe it happened to me. This is a story about a love that lasted for 10 years, and a decision I made when I realized that love had faded. I divorced my husband, David, because he gained weight. It sounds so petty and so superficial that I'm ashamed to say it out loud. But the real reason was much deeper, and the weight gain was just a symbol of everything we had lost. When we first met, David was the most athletic and energetic person I knew. We ran together in the mornings, went hiking on the weekends, and rode our bikes. He was the epitome of strength and health, and I loved him for it. He was alive, and our life was the same. We were a team, conquering the world. I was so in love with him, with his body, with his energy, with his desire to live life to the fullest. He was my best friend and my lover. The first 5 years of our marriage were like a honeymoon that never ended. We still ran, we still traveled, we were still the two people who seemed like they would never age. But then, something changed. When our son was born, David started spending more time at work. He said we needed the money to provide for our child. He stopped going to the gym, started preferring to watch television instead of evening walks, and, for dinner, he chose pizza more and more often, instead of a salad. I tried to talk to him, to persuade him, but he just brushed me off, saying I was exaggerating. "I'm just tired, Anna," he would say, "I need to relax." With each passing year, he grew bigger, and I grew more distant from him. His body, which had once been a symbol of our love, our energy, became a stranger's to me. It wasn't just a physical change, his spirit had changed too. He became passive, apathetic. When I suggested we go hiking, he said he was too tired. When I wanted to talk about our relationship, he said everything was fine. I felt lonely, as if I were living with a stranger. Our relationship had become a habit, not a love. And so, after 10 years of marriage, I woke up one morning and realized I couldn't live like this anymore. I didn't want to live with a man who had stopped caring for himself. I didn't want to be in a marriage where my partner had become just a roommate. I wanted my David back, the one I had loved, but I knew he would never return. And in that moment, I made the hardest decision of my life. I would get a divorce, and I would tell him today. The words were ready on my tongue, but my heart was beating, a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I sat in the living room, the quiet hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the house, rehearsing the speech in my mind. The feeling of guilt was a heavy blanket, but it couldn't extinguish the fire of my resolve. I had to do this. For both of us, for the memory of the people we used to be. The front door opened, and David walked in, his shoulders slumped from a long day at work. He didn't notice the tension in the room. He walked straight to the fridge, grabbed a beer, and sat on the couch with a tired sigh. He was a good man, a hardworking man, a man who loved our son. But he was a man I no longer knew. His body was a stranger to me, and his spirit was a quiet, dormant echo of the person I had fallen in love with. I felt a wave of sadness wash over me, a profound grief for the loss of a life we once had. I took a deep breath. "David," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his tired eyes. He saw the seriousness on my face, the fear in my eyes. "What is it, Anna? Is something wrong?" His voice was kind, gentle, and it made the words even harder to say. "David," I said again, my voice stronger this time, "I want a divorce." He laughed, a short, sharp, nervous laugh. He thought it was a joke. His face, which had been tired and worn, suddenly looked shocked and confused. The beer bottle in his hand trembled slightly. What are you talking about, Anna?" he asked, his voice filled with an almost childlike confusion. "Is this a joke, because it's not funny?" I shook my head, my eyes filling with tears. "It's not a joke, David, I'm serious." The silence that followed was deafening, a vacuum where our love and our life used to be. He just stared at me, his eyes wide and unblinking, trying to process the words. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice a raw, broken whisper. "What did I do? Is there someone else?" "No," I said, my voice filled with a desperate need for him to understand. "It's not that. It's about us. It's about what we've become." I tried to explain, to articulate the years of silent suffering, the feeling of living with a stranger. "You've changed, David. We've changed. We're not a team anymore. We're just two people who live in the same house." He didn't understand. He focused on the only tangible thing he could see. "The weight, isn't it?" he said, his voice laced with a hurt I had never heard before. "It's the weight, isn't it? I know I let myself go. I'll change, Anna, I promise. I'll go back to the gym tomorrow. I'll start running again. I'll get back in shape. Just give me a chance." The sincerity in his voice was heartbreaking. He was trying to solve the problem, but he was looking at the wrong one. He thought the weight was the cause, but it was just a symptom, a symbol of a deeper, more profound problem that he was completely blind to. Just then, our son Ethan called from the other room, a small, innocent voice that was a stark reminder of the life we were about to destroy. The sound of his voice broke the tension, but it also solidified the chasm between us. David, defeated and confused, stood up, the beer bottle still in his hand. He looked at me. his eyes filled with the hurt I knew I had caused. He didn't say another word. He just walked out of the room, leaving me alone with my decision, the silent house, and the knowledge that I had just broken the heart of the man I once loved more than anything in the world. The conversation was not a clean break. It was a messy, painful first step into a new and certain reality. The silence in the house was a new kind of sound, a heavy, suffocating weight that filled every room. After I spoke those words, we were no longer a family in the traditional sense. We were two strangers living under the same roof. David moved through the house like a ghost, his shoulders even more slumped, his face a mask of hurt and confusion. He didn't talk to me, he didn't laugh, he just existed, and the quiet grief of our unspoken words was more painful than any argument we had ever had. Our son, Ethan, was a constant, innocent reminder of the chasm between us. He was a curious, observant boy, and he noticed everything. One evening, he came into the kitchen where I was cooking and asked, "Mom, why don't you and Dad laugh anymore?" His question, so simple and so pure, was a knife to my heart. I knelt down and hugged him, trying to find words that wouldn't hurt him, but there were none. "We're just tired. Honey," I lied. "We're just tired." His innocent query was a stark reminder of the wreckage we were creating, and it filled me with a deep, consuming guilt. David, however, was not giving up. He had taken my words to heart in the only way he knew how. He had heard divorce and weight gain and had made a simple, logical equation: lose weight, save marriage. He woke up early every morning, the way he used to, and went for a run. I would hear his heavy, tired footsteps on the pavement outside, a stark contrast to the light, effortless stride of the man I used to run with. He started eating salads. For dinner, his face a grim mask of determination, while I sat across from him, my heart aching with a mix of pity and frustration. I watched his efforts with a heavy heart. He was trying, desperately, but it was a performance, a superficial attempt to fix a problem he still didn't understand. The joy and passion for life that had once fueled his workouts were gone. His runs were not an escape or a source of energy. They were a chore, a punishment for his failure. I saw him come home one evening, his face red and slick with sweat, his body exhausted. He was not the man who used to run for fun. He was a desperate man fighting for his life, and he was losing. One evening, he sat across from me at the dinner table, his plate filled with a salad he was barely touching. He looked at me, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Anna," he said, his voice soft, "have you noticed? I'm trying. I'm going back to the gym. I'm doing what you asked." His words were a painful reminder of his oblivion. He thought this was all about a number on a scale. He still didn't get it. "David," I said, my voice filled with a desperate sadness. "It was never about the weight. It was about what the weight represented. It was about you stopping caring about us, about our life, about your own life." He just stared at me, his eyes filled with a fresh wave of confusion and hurt. "I don't understand," he said, his voice a broken whisper. "I'm doing everything you asked." That was the moment I knew for certain that our marriage was over. He was still trying to solve the wrong problem. Later that night, I watched him from the doorway of the bedroom as he lay on the bed, exhausted and defeated, his new gym clothes piled in a corner. The man I had married was truly gone, and no amount of weight loss would ever bring him back. My decision, which had once felt like a terrible choice, now felt like a sad and final truth. The life we had built was over. The silence in the house, once filled with David's quiet presence, was now a constant, deafening echo of my own loneliness. I spent my days going through the motions, a ghost in my own home, a single mother trying to navigate a new and terrifying reality. I knew I couldn't live like this forever. I had to pick up the pieces of my life, but I had no idea where to even begin. With a deep breath, I reached out to an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years, a woman named Sarah, who had been my confidant before my marriage had become all-consuming. We met for coffee, and as I looked at her, so vibrant and full of life, I felt a deep sense of shame for letting myself become so lost. I told her everything, the weight gain, the quiet resentment, the divorce. I confessed my deepest fear, that I was a cruel and selfish woman who had abandoned her husband because of something so trivial. Sarah listened, her eyes filled with a deep, non-judgmental empathy. When I was finished, she reached across the table and took my hand. "Anna," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "this wasn't about weight, this was about love. You didn't leave him because he was bigger. You left him because he stopped trying. He stopped caring for himself, and in doing so, he stopped caring for the life you had together. You deserve to be happy, Anna, and you deserve to be with someone who wants to share that happiness with you, not just exist alongside you." Her words were a lifeline, a new perspective that I desperately needed. She was right. The weight was just a symbol, a physical manifestation of a much deeper, more profound decay. My new life, however, was not without its constant, painful reminders of the old one. My phone buzzed with a message, and for a moment, my heart jumped with the foolish hope that it was David, reaching out, telling me he understood. But the message was cold and impersonal. "Ethan has a dentist appointment next Tuesday at 3. Do you want me to take him?" The text was from David, but it was from a stranger. The man who had once written me love poems and sent me funny memes now communicated with me in clinical, transactional terms about our son. The love we once had was now a memory, and our new relationship was purely a business arrangement. That impersonal text, however, was a moment of profound clarity. I had spent so long blaming him for our unhappiness, for his passivity, for his neglect of his own life. But the truth was, I had a part to play in this, too. I had allowed myself to become a victim. I had allowed the silence and the resentment to poison my life, and I had never taken responsibility for my own happiness. The divorce wasn't just about him. It was also about me, about my own need to rediscover the vibrant, energetic woman who had fallen in love with him all those years ago. That evening, after Sarah and I had said our goodbyes, I found myself walking past a small art studio. I saw a flyer for a painting class, something I had always wanted to do but had never had the time for. I stood there for a long time, the paper in my hand, and for the first time in months, I felt a small flicker of hope. I was taking a step, a small, insignificant step, but it was a step toward a new life, a new future. It was a step toward rediscovering myself, and it was a step that I knew I had to take. Not for him, not for my son, but for myself. The road to healing was long and uncertain, but for the first time, I was ready to walk it. The painting class was a quiet sanctuary, a world of color and creation that felt a million miles away from the cold silence of my divorce. With each stroke of the brush, I felt a piece of myself returning. I wasn't just a mother or a divorcee. I was a person with my own thoughts and feelings, and the canvas was a blank slate for me to rediscover who I was. The colors were my voice, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was being heard. I met a man in the class named Mark. He was kind, funny, and had a passion for art that was infectious. We would talk for hours after class, sharing our lives, our dreams, and our fears. He was a breath of fresh air, a new and vibrant presence in a life that had been so stagnant for so long. He listened to me, he laughed with me, and he saw me not as a woman with a broken past, but as a person with a bright, uncertain future. My first encounter with David since the divorce was at Ethan's soccer game. My heart pounded as I saw him. On the other side of the field, his presence a ghost from a life that was now just a memory. He was standing alone, his hands in his pockets, his body still carrying the weight that had, in my mind, ended our marriage. But as I watched him, I saw a change. The apathy was gone. The defeated slump of his shoulders was replaced with a quiet dignity. He was no longer a shadow. He was a man who was hurting, a man who was carrying his own silent pain. He wasn't the man I had divorced. He was a man who was also trying to pick up the pieces of his own life. I felt a new kind of guilt, a profound sense of sadness that had nothing to do with my decision. I had spent so long blaming him for everything, for his passivity, for his neglect of his own life. But as I watched him, I saw a man who was a victim of his own unhappiness, just as I was. He was a person, not just a symbol, and my heart ached with a new kind of empathy, a profound sense of compassion for the man I had once loved so deeply. Later that evening, after the class, Mark and I were sitting at a small cafe, talking about our lives. I felt comfortable enough to tell him about my divorce, about David, about the guilt and the sadness. I told him the whole story, the petty, painful truth that I was ashamed to admit. He listened without judgment, his eyes filled with a deep, non-judgmental empathy. When I was finished, he just smiled, a kind, gentle smile that reached his eyes. "It sounds like you both lost something," he said, his voice soft, "but it also sounds like you're both trying to find something new. And that's a beautiful thing." The cold reality of our situation settled in like a permanent winter. The house was a quiet battlefield, filled with unspoken accusations and the heavy scent of failure. I knew I couldn't live in this silent purgatory anymore. My decision, once a distant, painful thought, now needed action. With a shaking hand, I called a lawyer. The conversation was during a clinical, professional discussion about assets, alimony, and custody. It was as if my entire marriage, our 10 years of love and life, was being reduced to a series of legal terms and cold, hard numbers. My life was being filed and categorized, and it was a new kind of pain. The lawyer, a sharp no-nonsense woman, named Sarah, sat across from me in her sterile office, a stack of papers between us. "The most important thing," she said, her voice devoid of emotion, "is to have a clear plan for your son. Custody, visitation, holidays." She spoke of Ethan as if he were a business asset, a term on a legal document. I felt a profound sense of nausea. This wasn't about assets. It was about a little boy's heart, and it was being torn in two. When David received the divorce papers, his reaction was not one of anger, but of a heartbreaking, quiet betrayal. He stopped sending me photos from the gym. His efforts, which had been so earnest and so futile, had ceased. He had finally understood that this wasn't a problem he could fix with a few extra miles on a treadmill. It was a finality, a death sentence for our marriage, and he had no idea how to fight it. He just existed in a cloud of quiet grief, and the silence between us became a deep, dark abyss. But the real conflict, the one that made my stomach churn with guilt and fear, was Ethan. We couldn't go on like this. We had to tell him it was a conversation we both dreaded, a moment that would forever change the landscape of our son's life. We sat in the living room, a space that was once filled with laughter and family memories, now filled with the weight of our impending words. David sat on one side of the couch, I sat on the other. A chasm of 10 years of disappointment between us. He was quiet, his eyes staring blankly at the wall. His body slumped in a way that was more than just physical exhaustion. It was the weight of defeat. My guilt was a crushing blow. Was I being selfish? Was my unhappiness worth the cost of my son's broken home? My mind was a whirlwind of self. But then I would remember the years of silence, the feeling of living with a stranger, the ache in my heart that had become a permanent resident. I had to be honest with myself, and I had to be honest with him. We had to tell him, and we had to be a united front. Ethan came into the room, his small, innocent face filled with a childlike joy that was a stark contrast to the grim reality of his parents. He sat on the floor between us, looking from me to David, his smile bright and pure. "Mom, Dad," he said, his voice a happy song. "Can we build a fort tonight?" His words, so full of simple hope and childlike wonder, were a final painful reminder of the life we were about to shatter. We looked at each other, a silent, terrible understanding passing between us. We had to tell him. We had to tell him that the fort we had built together, our family, was about to fall apart. And just as David opened his mouth to speak, my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, and I knew that this moment, this painful, awful moment, would be the most difficult and profound part of our story. Ethan's question, "Can we build a fort tonight?" hung in the air, a final, innocent plea for a reality that no longer existed. David looked at me, his eyes filled with a fresh wave of grief, a silent plea for me to say something, anything, to make this easier. But there were no easy words left. He took a deep, shuddering breath, and for the first time in a long time, he was the strong man I had married. "Ethan," he began, his voice trembling but steady, "your mom and I, we have something we need to tell you." The boy's face, once a picture of pure joy, was now a mask of confusion. He looked at us, his eyes wide, his small hands clenching into fists. "We're not going to be married anymore. We're getting a divorce." The words, so clinical and cold on paper, were a devastating reality in our living room. Ethan's reaction was not one of anger, but of profound confusion and sadness. "But why?" he asked, his voice a small broken whisper. "Don't you love each other?" The question was a dagger to my heart. We tried to explain it in the simplest terms, to tell him that we would always love him, that he was the most important thing in our lives. But our words were clumsy, inadequate. He just cried, a quiet, heartbreaking sob that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. David, unable to hold back his own grief, put his arms around our son, his body shaking with a sorrow that was raw and genuine. In that moment of shared grief, the chasm between us briefly closed, a painful bond of love for our son that we could never break. The house was a somber place after the conversation. The laughter and easy conversations were gone, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. We were a family in name only, 3 people who lived in the same space but were a million miles apart. Ethan was quiet, withdrawn, his innocence replaced by a deep, heartbreaking sadness. He was a silent victim of a war he didn't know how to fight. I watched David from a distance, a ghost in my own home. His futile attempts to change had ceased. The gym clothes he had bought lay in a crumpled heap in a corner of the bedroom. The hope he had once held, the desperate belief that he could fix us by changing himself, was gone. He was defeated, and the sight of his surrender filled me with a deep, consuming sadness. The man I had married, the vibrant, energetic person I had fallen in love with, was truly gone, and in his place was a defeated, heartbroken stranger. That night, I sat in the darkness, watching my son sleep, his face a picture of quiet grief. I had made a choice, a hard, painful choice, and I was now living with the consequences. I had broken his heart, and for that, I would be forever sorry. But I knew, with a certainty that was both heartbreaking and resolute, that I had made the right decision. I couldn't have raised him in a home filled with silent resentment and quiet unhappiness. I couldn't have taught him that a loving marriage was a cold, silent arrangement. The divorce, while painful, was an honest break, not a slow, poisonous decay. It was the end of a family, but it was also the beginning of a new, uncertain future. A future where we could, perhaps, find a new kind of peace. The legal process of our divorce was a cold, efficient machine that ground our shared life into dust. The lawyers, in their sterile offices, talked about assets and debts, child support and visitation, as if they were discussing the division of a business, not the end of a family. David and I would sit in separate rooms, communicating through legal intermediaries, our love and our life reduced to a series of clauses and conditions. The process was mercifully quick, and as the final papers were signed, I felt not a sense of victory, but a strange, hollow emptiness. The day David moved out was a surreal, heartbreaking blur. He packed his belongings into a small U-Haul, each box a chapter of our life together, being sealed and taken away. The old photos from our first apartment, the framed picture of us from our wedding, the little trinkets we had collected on our trips, they were all gone. I watched from the living room window, a silent, heartbroken spectator to the end of my marriage. He was a ghost in my house, and with each box he carried, a piece of our past was being taken away forever. When he drove off, the street was silent, and I was left alone in a house that felt too big, too empty, and too full of ghosts. The silence I had once longed for was now a deafening, oppressive presence. The house, which had once felt like a home, now felt like a hollow, lonely prison. I had gotten what I wanted, my freedom, my space, but it came at a high cost. I had a moment of reckoning, a painful period of introspection where I had to face my own demons. Was I a monster? Was I a cruel, shallow woman who had left her husband because he had changed? Had I not tried hard enough? My mind was a whirlwind of self-doubt and guilt. I had been so focused on his failure, on his loss of passion, that I had never considered my own role in our unhappiness. Had I given up on him too soon? The loneliness was a constant, aching presence. Our son was with me, but his silence was a constant reminder of the pain we had caused. He was a quiet, withdrawn child, and his small, sad face was a mirror of my own guilt. I was now a single mother, and my new freedom felt more like a new solitude, a new kind of prison. One evening, after Ethan was asleep, I found a box in the back of a closet. It was our old photo albums, forgotten relics from a happier time. I opened the first one, and there we were, a young, vibrant, and incredibly happy couple. David was in his prime, his body lean and strong, his eyes filled with a boyish charm, and a deep love for me. We were on a hiking trail, our arms around each other, our faces flushed with a mixture of joy and exertion. I went through the albums, page after page, a chronicle of a love that was once so beautiful and so real. The pictures were a painful reminder of what we had lost, a tangible record of a man who was now just a memory. I looked at the picture of the young, fit, and happy couple, and I looked at my reflection in the dark window, a woman, now alone and heartbroken. I wasn't crying for the man he had become, or for the weight he had gained. I was crying for the life we had together, the life that was now just a series of fading photographs. "I'm coming with you," I said, my voice firm. Victor looked at me, a flicker of irritation in his eyes. "Alexander, this is not a game. I am a professional. You are a civilian. You will only get in the way." But my resolve was unshakable. "Katya is my daughter. I am in this because of her. I will not let you go in there alone." He saw the determination in my eyes, the desperation of a father fighting for his child, and he finally relented with a sigh. "Fine, but you follow my lead. You make one sound, one mistake, and we're both dead. Understood?" I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest with a mix of fear and adrenaline. Before we left, I went to Katya's room. She was sitting on her bed, her face pale, but her eyes were filled with a new kind of strength. She knew the risk we were taking, the danger we were walking into. She stood up and came to me, wrapping her arms around my neck. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly, "be careful. I love you." It was a simple phrase, but it was everything. It was her trust, her love, her faith in me. In that moment, I wasn't just a paranoid father, I was her hero, and I knew I had to come back. The drive to the warehouse was a blur of silence and tension. Victor drove, his eyes constantly scanning the road, his movements precise and controlled. I sat in the passenger seat, my body a tense, coiled spring, my mind racing with 100 different scenarios. We arrived at the location, a run-down warehouse on the waterfront, just as Katya had said. The area was quiet, desolate, and filled with a chilling, oppressive silence. We got out of the car, and Victor went into full professional mode. He moved with a quiet, lethal grace, his body low to the ground. I, on the other hand, felt clumsy and slow, my every move a loud, clumsy echo in the silent night. We found a small, unlocked back door and slipped inside. The warehouse was vast and dusty, filled with the ghosts of old machinery and forgotten dreams. A small, dimly lit office was in the back, the only sign of life in the entire building. Victor went in first, his gun drawn. I followed, my heart pounding in my chest. The office was small, cluttered, and filled with computers and ledgers. We found what we were looking for, a server filled with encrypted files, ledgers of illegal transactions, and a hidden safe. Victor cracked the safe with a speed and precision that left me speechless. Inside, we found more ledgers, a small bag of diamonds, and a large, framed photograph. It was a picture of Artyom, not with his friends, but with a notorious crime lord whose face I had seen on the news, a man linked to disappearances and murders. This was the proof we needed. It was undeniable. Just as we were about to leave, our victory within our grasp, we heard a sound, the unmistakable sound of a car pulling up outside, its engine rumbling to a stop. We froze, our bodies tense, our hearts pounding. We weren't alone. Someone was coming. We were trapped, with the proof we needed and the people we were trying to expose on our doorstep. The game, which had been going our way, had just changed in a terrifying final moment. The sound of the car engine outside was a chilling reminder of our predicament. We were trapped, with the evidence in our hands, and the very people we were trying to expose were on our doorstep. Victor, with a quiet urgency, pushed me into a small, dusty closet, his voice a low whisper. "Don't move. Don't make a sound." He took a position by the door, his handgun ready, his face a mask of cold, professional calm. I stood in the darkness, the faint light from the office, a thin line under the door, my heart pounding in my chest, so loudly I was sure they could hear it. The door to the office opened with a loud creak, and I heard voices, Artyom's voice, cold and sharp, and another man's, a gravelly, menacing rumble. "Check the safe," Artyom said, his voice filled with a quiet fury. "They've been here. He knows." The realization was a cold, sharp slap to the face. He hadn't just suspected, he knew. He was a predator, and I had been a toy he was playing with. I heard the clink of metal, a curse from the other man. "It's empty," he said. "The ledgers are gone." A moment of chilling silence, and then a cold, quiet rage from Artyom. "Find him," he hissed. "Find him, and the girl. I want them both now." I heard footsteps, the sound of things being thrown, a quiet desperation in Artyom's voice. They were searching for us, and they were getting closer. Just as I felt the cold panic start to take hold, I heard a sound, the distinct, muffled crack of a gunshot. Then a second, the door of the office burst open, and Victor, his face grim, his handgun smoking, motioned for me to follow him. "Go," he hissed. "They're gone. We have to go. Now." We ran, a silent, desperate sprint through the dark warehouse, the evidence clutched in my hand like a lifeline. We got in the car and drove, leaving the city behind us, my heart pounding in my chest, a mix of fear and adrenaline. We were no longer on the run. We were in the clear. We had the evidence, the proof we needed to put Artyom away for good. We drove back to the safe house, where Katya was waiting for us, her face pale, her eyes filled with fear and hope. When she saw me, she ran into my arms, a profound sense of relief washing over her. "You're safe," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're safe." The rest of the story is an old, simple tale. We gave the evidence to a special task force Sergei had arranged. It was a long, painful process, but Artyom and his syndicate were taken down. Katya's heart was broken, but it was also healing. She realized that the man she loved was a lie, a monster in a beautiful suit, and she had been lucky to escape with her life and her soul intact. Years later, Katya is living a new life. She's a happy, successful young woman, and she's found a new love, a man who is kind, honest, and real. I, the simple engineer, the man who was afraid of a world he didn't understand, learned a profound lesson. I learned that a father's love is a powerful thing. It can build a bridge to a better life, and it can be a shield against a monster. And I learned that the most profound and lasting victory isn't in a business deal or a new bridge, but in the quiet, peaceful certainty that your daughter is safe. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it brought you some sense of closure, some sense of peace, some sense of hope.